To get started on your Bauhaus-inspired paper collage, you'll be given a large paper that I already drew out a 10 by 10 square on. You'll need to divide this into 16 different sections, and to do that, we need to make a mark every 2.5 inches. So on 2.5, 5, 7.5. After you make your marks, you'll need to use your ruler to make very light lines connecting those dots. We need these lines to be as light as possible because we will be erasing them in the end. If you're not comfortable measuring these out, then I do have templates that you can trace over. You'll need to put them over the window and still try to use a ruler to keep these lines as straight as possible. To get started, I would recommend working in your top left square first. I knew I needed to use geometric shapes, so for my first shape that I was using my colors, I divided it into a triangle and I wanted it to be perfect, so I used a ruler to measure it. This is not required. I only did this sometimes moving throughout my collage, and other times I just used my scissors to cut myself geometric squares. But remember that geometric shapes are going to be precise 2D shapes. So you're going to think things that you know the names of, like squares, circles, triangles. Keep this as simple as possible. This doesn't have to be complicated. We're just using our paper to create abstract designs. As I worked in each section, I felt that it was easier to plan it out before you glued it down so that you didn't have to peel your paper up and risk ruining everything. If you peel your paper up, it might rip your squares and then you'd have to start over again. And like I said, we want to use every piece of these colored papers throughout the project, so starting over would create some confusion. As I worked, I laid out each area, planned it out, and then realized how I was going to glue it down. Once you get your glue stick, you're going to find a way that works for you. For some of my pieces, I felt that it was easier to just push the glue stick up a little bit, rub the paper along the top, and then glue it down. For other smaller pieces, I felt that it was easier to put the glue all over one whole square and then lay my pieces down. Depends on you and how you're working, but just remember that if you put glue down on a whole square, you need to get your papers on quickly because it will dry quickly. As you're working, your fingers are going to get glue on them, and it may be a little frustrating, and your papers may stick in places you don't want them to, or they won't stick because your fingers are full of glue. So we need to have patience throughout this project and make sure we're not losing our little tiny pieces just because glue is everywhere. You also need to make sure that because glue is everywhere, that you're keeping your space clean. In the very beginning, I was putting glue in the center of my paper while I put it on my paper scraps. This was not the best method for me to start because then the center of my paper started to get brown and dingy from there being glue everywhere. I would recommend laying your paper scraps on the doodle part of your page, that extra space that we're going to cut off in the end, because that way it can get as gross as you need it to and it won't affect the quality and craftsmanship of your work when we're finished. Keep in mind that when we're working with our Bauhaus-inspired collages, that we need to consider asymmetrical balance. So there will be some balance using your positive and negative space throughout this work, but also remember that we are just using very simple shapes to layer, have fun, and experiment different ways of filling in each of these squares. If you would prefer to draw out your designs first, you could use your sketchbook or your doodle space, or you can just go at it the way that I did. We're going to continue this until each one of our squares is complete. I would recommend working in a row for especially your first section, so go top left to top right and then work your way down. As you're working, I found it easier to erase my lines as I went. Make sure your glue is dry first, but easier to erase those lines as I went. Towards the end, I went to erase and realized that I had pushed too hard in certain areas and I wasn't able to get rid of those grid lines. It does look a lot cleaner if we're able to get rid of those while you're working. Continue this process until you fill up each of your squares. And remember that you do not have to use all of your colors in each square, but you are required to have at least 3 shapes within each section of your work. And we're utilizing every small piece of scrap. At the end of each class period, you'll be placing all of your squares into a Ziploc bag with your name and class code on it. This Ziploc bag will go inside your sketchbook and your artwork will go on the drying rack until everything is completed. Once your work is complete, go back in with your eraser really carefully so that you're not picking up any of your pieces you've glued down, and try your best to get rid of any extra lines that are still there. Then we will cut off your doodle space and you'll be left with a crisp white border around your work. Because we cut your name off, make sure that your name and class code get written once again on the back of your paper, and then you're ready to photograph this and upload it to Artsonia.